We are going to talk about three theses about capitalism in this video, and those three theses are fairly straightforward, but they might not be obvious in the sense that not everybody might agree with these theses. So the first one is capitalism is a historical construct. What does that mean? Capitalism is a historical construct. What do I mean by that? I don't mean by it that anybody can construct capitalism whenever they want. What it means is capitalism is not a natural phenomenon. That is, it is not something which is found everywhere. So that's the place. Or it is not a phenomenon which is found anytime. So a natural phenomenon, for example, gravity is a natural phenomenon. So, unless you create something, artificial conditions, is it a good example? Gravity is found everywhere, let's say in our Earth, and anytime it is found in Japan, it is found in UK, it is found in Africa. And day and night it was there probably 5,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Hopefully it will be there after. In this sense, capitalism is not a natural phenomenon. It is a contingent historical fact that it has a beginning and one day it will end, like all other. And by construct we mean that certain conditions combined with the wants and desires of certain peoples that was established, maybe not entirely intentionally, but it's constructed in that sense that it requires certain conditions, intentions, and actions. So it was constructed in that sense. And if it is constructed, if it has a history, if it has a beginning, it can be deconstructed. It can be, we can place something else in its place. In this sense, we say that it is a historical fact and not a natural phenomenon. Now, we can say these things differently from different perspectives, but that doesn't mean that it has. But all those perspectives would agree to this basic fact. So, for example, someone like Polanyi, in his Great Transformation, makes this point that the basic principles, economic principle, can be, or motives can be, whether the purpose of exchange, for example, or the purpose of production is so we can use something. On the other hand, we can go beyond that and we produce something or exchange something entirely to gain more things. And Polanyi says that what we find is throughout most of the history before capitalism is that the basic principle of economy is use. You create things, you produce things, you exchange things because you need things and you want to use them. The economy before capitalism wasn't based on the principle of gain, it was based on the principle of use. And according to him, it was true in Greece, it was true in Iran, it was true in India, it was true in Roman Empire, it was true in feudalism, Christian feudalism in Europe. That the economy was basically based on the principle of use, and there was no such thing as economy based on gain. This only comes after capitalism is established. So in this sense, we can say that capitalism didn't exist in Greece. It didn't exist in ancient India or in Roman Empire or in Christendom, feudal Christian medieval civilization. And that doesn't mean that, according to Polanyi, that individual ambitions don't exist. That's not what we are claiming. People always want. There has been ambitious people always. But the ambitions of people were constrained by, and I'm talking about economic ambitions here, constrained by custom and law and religion, etc. So economy wasn't run by market in that sense. So there might be ambitious people and they might accumulate a lot of money, but that just proved the rule rather than indicating that there's something such as market exists in the sense that the market has its own autonomous rules and is based on the principle of gain. There was no such thing before capitalism. That's Polanyi's thesis in his great book, Great Transformation. And same thing you can say in a more structuralist Marxist diction. So, for example, you say that before capitalism, yes, surplus exists, but there's no systematic conception of using that surplus to make more surplus. In other words, there's no principle of accumulation for the sake of accumulation. So surplus are used in more other ways. In feudal, surplus is used for show off your wealth. So to make magnificent buildings, for wars, for different reasons, but this principle of gain doesn't exist, that you use surplus to make more surplus. And it doesn't exist in the sense that it is not conceptualized consistently. So the conception in any consistent sense doesn't exist. And two, it doesn't have legitimacy, general legitimacy, societal legitimacy. And number three, it doesn't have institutions. So for market doesn't exist in that sense. Markets in this sense only exist with capitalism, because it is only with market that you institutionalize the principle of gain in Polanyi's sense, or principle of accumulation, for the sake of accumulation in more Marxist sense. Okay, the same thing we can the same thing can be described in more religious sense. So you can say that in before capitalism, individuals, ambitious individuals exist. The desire for more exists. Desire to accumulate exists. Desire for gain more than others exists. But these things are considered vices by the morality, by the dominant morality. So in Christianity, for example, in medieval Christianity, you have two vices associated with economic activity. So you have avarice, which you can say that it is what we mean by gain, or in Polanyi's term, or accumulation. Or covetousness, which you can competition. So individual ambitions exist, but those desires are considered considered vices, and not some virtues as in capitalism. And there's no general legitimacy for those vices, and they are not institutionalized. Okay, so this is enough for the first thesis that capitalism has a history. So it starts in a specific historical circumstances, probably in Northern Europe, Northwestern Europe, between, let's say, 11th century to 15th, 16th century, and developed in the peripheries of the civilization, and then slowly, for whatever reason, we are not after those reasons at the moment, it come to dominate society today. Okay, now the second thesis is that capitalism is a culture. So capitalism is not just knowledge. So it's not just economics. This knowledge is based on culture. A certain spirituality, so to speak. And that spirituality praises certain values which were before vices, they become virtues now. So industriousness or competition, merit, meritocracy. I mean, what basically establish your merit is, at the end of the day, your ability to accumulate more than others. So these values and this knowledge is important, but you need spirituality as well. So in Christian civilization, you have Christian spirituality, and I guess in India and in Iran and in Greek civilization and Roman civilization, they had their own spirituality. Capitalism has its own spirituality, and that spirituality is manifested in many aspects, but one of the key aspects is entertainment. And this is important because entertainment reflects two things. First, life as a play, as enjoyment. And if you don't have if you have any serious conception of a life above play, then you are not going to see it as rational. See it as rational to commit yourself or your society to a system where you accumulate for the sake of accumulation. We'll see it as pure irrationality. And the second aspect of entertainment is live entertainment and enjoyment and play become an integral part of it is forgetfulness, self. So you have this conception in other civilization as well, but in a totally different context. So forgetfulness of your own self, your real self, and obviously in Germany that's is needed for the dominance of desire. Unless desires are dominant part of your life, you are not going to commit yourself to a capitalist way of life. But forgetfulness is also very important because there's forgetfulness of your own self, in the sense that you forget your own death. Because if death is a central part of your culture, like in medieval civilization, for example, then you are not going to commit yourself for accumulation for the sake of accumulation, because in a sense accumulation for the sake of accumulation presupposes eternalization of this world. Because unless you think that world is eternal and you yourself are eternal, there's no rational basis for committing yourself to accumulation for the sake of accumulation. Now, capitalism can circumvent this problem through two means historically. One, through communism or socialism, because here you don't have to suppose that individual is eternal, but you still suppose, like Hegel and Marx, that your species is eternal. So accumulation for the sake of accumulation, you're doing it because your species is eternal, and you as a species being, as an individual part of that species, see your life as continuation in the life of species. And capitalism also does this through nationalism, in the sense that here nation continues even after an individual dies. But the problem with this is that capitalism as a system of accumulation for the sake of accumulation cannot tolerate collectivities for too long, because they can become limit to this logic of accumulation for the sake of accumulation. So that's why it's only contingent relationship of capitalism with socialism and also with nationalism, because nations and species can themselves become object for the sake of which you accumulate, but then that's not capitalism anymore. In on this side, so that's why the ideal form of capitalism is individualism. That's why liberalism is its most lasting ally of capitalism, or instrument of capitalism, because individual, you can use individual easily. It can't really hinder capitalist rationality, because it doesn't have that sort of power. And so we are back to individualism, and that's why you need entertainment in all senses, forgetfulness of death, through music industry, through all the sort of like alcohol, drugs, and all those things. And that's why you see the most advanced capitalist societies are individualistic in that sense. And they have this problem of meaninglessness because individuals, even if we pretend, it's very hard to consistently for individuals to pretend that they are eternal, commit themselves wholeheartedly. So that's why you need a lot of education in that sense, propaganda, and managing individuals through media, through mass education, through mass print and social media, etc., etc. So it's a constant thing, managing individuals, so they can keep committed to this essentially irrational system. Okay, so what's the third thesis? So the third thesis is, and it follows from the first two in a sense, but needs to be mentioned separately. Capitalism is the worldview. And civilization, rather than just an economic system. So what does this mean is that capitalism needs to work in production and reproduction at three levels. So you have individual level. So you need to produce, shape, constitute. Maybe one day they will produce as well. Individuals who are committed to capitalist rationality. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need a capitalist society. In the sense that social relations and social institutions are based on capitalist rationality. Obviously, that requires education system, which is part of it, culture. So basically, society becomes a civil society, a society based on capitalist value. And the third thing is, and producing such a society and institution and reproducing it is important for the continuation of capitalism. You need capitalist states, so capitalism needs power to protect and defend capitalism and implement capitalist rules through law, regulations, through violence, legitimate violence, etc., etc. In earlier days, the companies had that function. So in India, for example, East India Company wasn't just a company, it has its own army. It issued money, it coined money, it implemented laws, or it waged wars, etc. And the same for other companies, in that period. But when capitalism grew, it became impossible for companies to uh, play that role. So that role went to the states, and you need one state. If the capitalism is global, you need one state which is able to, which has enough power to, coercive power, moral power, power of violence, armies to protect capitalism, its institutions. In earlier days, this role was played by Britain, and now America plays that role. Although, by the capture of American states by banks and finance, it seems like we are returning back to the East India model, but we have to see. So these are three theses, so at the moment I just stated those theses. So in future videos we'll look at the pros and cons and against these theses. Okay, thank you for listening.